My dear friend, if you are watching this right now, please don't scroll away. Sit with me for a moment. What I'm about to tell you is not just my story. It is a warning. It is a mirror. And by the end of this, I want you to ask yourself one hard question. If this were you, what would you have done differently? My name is Aloan Harper. I am 71 years old. I live in a quiet retirement community outside a small town in Iowa, the kind of place where the grass is always trimmed and people smile but don't really see you. I raised 3 children. I worked for 35 years as a school librarian. I believed in marriage, sacrifice, and doing the right thing even when it hurts. And today I am standing in a courtroom, watching my own blood look at me like I am a stranger. Before I go any further, let me say this. If you love emotional and powerful stories like this, stories that teach real-life lessons and protect you from making the same mistakes I made, please subscribe to this channel right now. Like this video, turn on your notification button and stay with me till the end. And tell me in the comments which part of the country you are watching from. I want to know who is sitting with me through this truth. Now let me take you back to the moment that changed everything. The judge had just asked one simple question. Mrs. Harper, did you sign these documents willingly? I looked down at the papers. My hands were shaking. Those papers took my house, my savings, my pension, and my dignity. Papers I signed because I trusted the people I loved most. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could speak, my daughter cleared her throat and said she knew what she was doing. She agreed to everything. That was the moment my heart cracked. My dear friend, have you ever been betrayed so deeply that your body goes cold before your mind even understands what just happened? That was me, sitting there, realizing the people I sacrificed my youth for had already buried me while I was still alive. You see, this story didn't start in a courtroom. It started years earlier, with love, loyalty, and one very expensive mistake. And if I could reach through this screen and grab your hand, I would tell you this. Never assume family will protect you just because you share blood. Let me ask you something. If your child came to you crying, telling you they were drowning in debt, would you help them if your husband told you signing one document would make life easier for everyone? Would you trust him? I did. Every single time. I used to believe that being a good woman meant being quiet, patient, always understanding. I believed that if I gave enough, loved enough, stayed strong enough, things would work out. I was wrong. That courtroom silence was loud. Louder than any argument I ever had. Louder than the nights I cried alone in my kitchen after everyone went to bed. Because in that silence, I finally understood something they never expected me to realize. They thought I was weak. They thought age made me invisible. They thought I would be too ashamed to fight back. My dear friend, if you are a woman watching this, especially if you are caring, forgiving, and used to putting others first, listen carefully. The world will test how much you are willing to lose before you finally say enough. As I sat there, staring at the judge, I remembered the first time my husband asked me to sign something without reading it. I remembered the way my son avoided my eyes when money was mentioned. I remembered how my daughter slowly started calling less once she got what she needed. And I wondered, when did love turn into strategy? If this were you, sitting in that courtroom, hearing your own child testify against you, what would you do? Would you stay silent to keep the peace, or would you finally tell the truth, even if it burns everything down? Because in that moment, I had a choice. And the choice I made next would change their lives forever. If you want to know what I signed, who planned this betrayal, and how a quiet grandmother became the last person they should have underestimated, stay with me. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and make sure you are subscribed. My dear friend, before you judge me for what I am about to say, pause and think about your own life. Think about the last time someone you loved asked you for help. Did you hesitate or did you say yes before they even finished the sentence? Because that is where my downfall began. Not with greed, not with weakness, but with love that had no boundaries. Let me take you back 5 years before that courtroom. I was 66 then, still strong, still driving myself everywhere, still cooking Sunday dinners that filled the house with the smell of roast chicken and cornbread. My home sat on the edge of a small Iowa town. White porch, wind chimes, a maple tree I planted when my first child was born. That house was not just wood and walls. It was my entire life. My husband, Rowan Harper, had passed away 2 years earlier. 41 years of marriage gone just like that. He handled the finances. I handled everything else. That was our agreement. And yes, my dear friend, that was mistake number 1. One evening, my oldest son, Caleb, showed up unannounced. He was always charming when he wanted something. Soft voice, sad eyes. He sat at my kitchen table and stared at his hands like a little boy again. "Mom," he said, "I messed up." Those 3 words should have made me ask questions. They should have made me slow down. But instead, my heart went straight into rescue mode. He told me his business was failing, that loans were overdue, that his wife was threatening to leave with the kids. He said he just needed time, just a little help, just someone to believe in him. My dear friend, if your child told you their family was about to fall apart, would you ask for bank statements or would you reach for their hand? I reached for his hand. I told him we would figure it out, that families stick together, that his father would have wanted me to help. And that was the moment he leaned back in his chair and smiled, just slightly. A week later, my daughter Maribel called. She lived in Arizona then. Her voice was tight, controlled. She said Caleb had told her everything. She said we needed to protect the family, that it was smarter to move assets around, that people like me get taken advantage of if we are not careful. Do you hear the irony? She said she found a financial advisor, a nice man, church-going, trustworthy. He would help us reorganize things so Caleb could breathe again. I asked one question, will I be safe? She answered without hesitation, "Of course, Mom, this is for you too." My dear friend, never let anyone rush you through decisions that affect your future. Urgency is how traps are built. The meeting happened in my living room. The advisor spoke fast but smiled a lot. He used words like restructuring and protection and temporary solutions. Papers were laid out neatly, tabs highlighted, lines marked where I needed to sign. I remember asking, why does my name need to come off the house? Rowan always said this made things easier for taxes, he replied. And your children will handle things now so you can rest. Rest, as if my life was already over. Maribel squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "You trust us, right?" I signed. That night I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong. But every time doubt crept in, I pushed it away. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself good mothers don't question their children. Let me ask you this. Who taught us that love means silence? Who taught us that protecting peace is more important than protecting ourselves? Weeks turned into months. Caleb stopped visiting. Maribel called less. And letters started arriving addressed to companies I had never heard of. When I asked questions, I was told not to worry. When I insisted, I was told I was confused. When I pressed harder, I was told I was being difficult. That is how it happens, my dear friend. Not with shouting, not with violence, but with gentle voices that slowly erase you. The day I realized something was truly wrong was the day I tried to pay my property taxes and was told my name was no longer on the deed. I laughed at first. I actually laughed. There must be a mistake, I said. The woman behind the counter looked at me with pity, the kind that strips you naked. No mistake, Mrs. Harper. You transferred ownership last year. I walked out into the cold and stood there, holding my purse like it was the only proof I still existed. If this were you, what would you do next? Call your children, confront them, pretend you never found out? I went home and waited. That night, Caleb finally called me back. Mom, you agreed to this, he said. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. Harder for who? Because that was the moment I understood something terrifying. They didn't see me as their mother anymore. They saw me as an obstacle. My dear friend, let me ask you something painful. Have you ever been made to feel like you are a burden in your own life, like the air you breathe costs too much? Because that is exactly how they began to treat me, once they realized I was asking too many questions. After that phone call with Caleb, days passed with no answers. No visits, no explanations, just silence. And silence, I learned, is a powerful weapon when you are old and alone. Then one afternoon, Maribel showed up at my door. She hugged me tightly, the way people do when they are about to lie. She looked around the house, the same house I no longer owned, and sighed. Mom, she said gently, we're worried about you. Worried, such a convenient word. She told me the stress wasn't good for my health, that at my age, confusion was normal, that the paperwork was already done and going backwards would only cause problems. Let me pause here and tell you something I wish someone had told me earlier. When people start questioning your memory instead of answering your questions, they are not helping you. They are controlling you. She suggested something new, a temporary stay at a retirement community, just until things settled, just until I stopped worrying so much. If it was you, my dear friend, would you see the trap? Would you hear what was really being said? I didn't, because I was tired of fighting, tired of feeling like the villain in my own family. So I agreed. They packed my things for me, not everything, just enough to make it look temporary. My photo album stayed behind. My husband's jacket stayed in the closet. The maple tree outside my window was still full of leaves when I left. The place they took me to smelled like disinfectant and boiled vegetables. The staff was polite but rushed. The residents moved slowly, eyes glazed like they were already halfway gone. This is for your own good, Caleb said as he signed me in. Those words should terrify you, my dear friend. They are the same words used to take away freedom. The first week, they visited every day. The second week, every other day. By the third week, I was lucky if I got a phone call. When I asked about my house, I was told not to fixate. When I asked about my money, I was told I was being paranoid. One nurse pulled me aside and asked quietly, "Do you feel safe with your family?" I didn't know how to answer, because admitting the truth would mean admitting I raised this. At night, I lay in a narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment I chose trust over caution. I wondered how many women before me had ended up here because they were too kind, too loyal, too afraid of being called difficult. Let me ask you this. Why is an older woman standing up for herself called trouble, but a younger person taking everything is called smart? One morning I received a letter, not from my children, from a law office. It informed me that my living expenses would now be managed by a family trust. My access to funds would be limited for my protection. Protection from what? My own life. That was the moment fear turned into clarity. I realized something important, my dear friend. They had planned this, not out of anger, not out of desperation, but out of convenience. I was easier to move than the money. And here is the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. I almost stayed quiet. I almost convinced myself this was normal, that this is just what happens when women age. But then I overheard a conversation in the hallway that changed everything. Two staff members were whispering about a new resident who had lost her home the same way. Children, trust documents, sudden confusion. I wasn't alone. And if this was a pattern, then it was also a mistake. Because patterns can be proven. Dear friend, have you ever had a moment where everything inside you goes quiet, not because you've given up, but because you've finally understood the truth that is what happened to me after that hallway conversation? I stopped crying after that day, not because I wasn't hurt, but because tears no longer served me. I began to listen instead. I watched. I paid attention to patterns, words, timing. I became invisible on purpose. People underestimate quiet women, especially older ones. A week later, a new social worker was assigned to my floor. Her name was Lenora Briggs, not young, not old, sharp eyes, calm voice. She didn't talk at me, she talked with me, and that alone made her different. During our first meeting, she didn't ask me how I was feeling. She asked me one simple question. "Eloan," she said, "do you know why you're here?" No one had ever asked me that. I told her what my children said, that I was stressed, that I needed rest, that things were being handled for me. She nodded, then asked, "And what do you think?" That question hit me harder than any accusation. I hesitated. My instinct was still to protect them, to soften the truth, but something in her silence gave me permission to speak. I told her everything, the papers, the house, the trust, the way my questions were turned into proof of my confusion. She didn't interrupt me once. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "Mrs. Harper, you are not confused." I felt something break loose in my chest. She explained something, my dear friend, that I need you to hear clearly. Financial abuse of elders does not start with stealing. It starts with isolating, with control disguised as care, with urgency dressed up as love. She asked if I had copies of anything. I told her no. Everything was taken care of, they said. Lenora smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "That's what they all say," she replied. From that day on, she began stopping by more often, always casually, always brief, but she asked precise questions, dates, names, exact phrases my children used. "Do you remember who suggested the advisor?" she asked. "Who drove you to the appointment? Did anyone tell you not to read the documents?" Each answer I gave felt like placing another stone on a scale that was slowly tipping. One afternoon, she brought me a cup of coffee and said, "I pulled your county records." I didn't even know she could do that. "Your name was removed from the deed 6 months ago. There was no medical evaluation attached, no legal requirement that you relinquish control." Then she looked at me and said, "Someone rushed this for a reason." My dear friend, if you are watching this and someone is rushing you through life-changing decisions, stop. That urgency is not for your benefit. But the real turning point came 2 days later. I was sitting in the common room, pretending to read, when I heard Caleb's voice down the hall. He was arguing with the administrator. His voice was sharp, irritated. "I don't understand why she needs so many meetings," he said. "We already handled everything." Handled everything. Lenora walked past me without looking. Minutes later, she returned and gently touched my shoulder. "Eloan," she said, "would you like to step into my office?" Caleb was already there. He smiled when he saw me, too wide, too rehearsed. "Mom," he said, "we're just making sure you're comfortable." Lenora sat down and folded her hands. "Actually," she said, "we're making sure your mother understands her rights." The room went still. She explained that I had the right to independent legal counsel, the right to access my finances, the right to leave if I chose. Caleb laughed, a short, nervous sound. "This is unnecessary," he said. "She's emotional." Lenora didn't flinch. "Emotion does not equal incompetence," she replied. That sentence changed my life. For the first time, someone said what I had been screaming silently for months. After Caleb left, Lenora told me something that made my stomach drop. The trust that controlled my money listed my children as beneficiaries, not caretakers, beneficiaries. They weren't managing my future. They were waiting for it to end. If this were you, my dear friend, what would you feel? Rage, shame, grief, or something colder? What I felt was resolve. Because now I knew something they didn't expect. I had time, and they had left a trail. My dear friend, let me ask you something honest. Have you ever smiled at people who thought they had already won? That is what I started doing after Lenora told me the truth. I stopped arguing. I stopped asking questions in front of my children. When Caleb visited, I thanked him for everything. When Maribel called, I told her I was resting and feeling better. I became exactly what they wanted me to be. Compliant. But behind that softness, something else was happening. Lenora arranged for me to meet an independent attorney. His name was Tobias Reed. Quiet man, gray hair, the kind of person who listens more than he speaks. He came to the facility as if he were just another visitor. He brought a thin folder and a pen. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "tell me everything in your own words." And I did, slowly, carefully, every detail I could remember, each signature, each promise, each time I was told not to worry. He didn't rush me. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he closed the folder and said something that made me sit straighter. "You did not consent in an informed way." Those words mattered. He explained that consent requires understanding, that trust does not replace transparency, that family involvement does not cancel out the law. Then he said this, and my dear friend, I want you to remember it. Kindness is not legal permission. We requested copies of every document, the trust agreements, the deed transfer, the financial statements. That alone made my children nervous. Caleb started calling more, too much, asking what meetings I was having, asking if Lenora was filling my head with ideas. Maribel's tone changed, sweet again, apologetic. She said maybe they moved too fast, maybe things could be adjusted. Adjusted, as if my life were a thermostat. But here is what they didn't know. Tobias had already noticed something critical. The signatures were all mine, but the witnesses were not independent. One worked for the same advisor who prepared the documents. Another was a neighbor I barely knew. More importantly, there was no proof I received full explanation of the consequences. My dear friend, if you are watching this, always remember this. If someone benefits from your signature, they should not be the one explaining what you are signing. Weeks passed. Quietly, Tobias filed motions. Lenora documented behavior. I kept notes of every call, every visit, every shift in tone. Then something unexpected happened. One afternoon, Maribel came alone. No warning, no smile. She sat across from me and said, "We never meant to hurt you." That sentence told me everything. People who mean well don't say that. She admitted they were under pressure, that Caleb pushed for control, that they believed I would be easier if decisions were made for me. Easier, not safer, not happier, easier. I asked her one question. If I had been a man, would you have done this? She didn't answer. That silence was louder than any confession. Tobias later explained that emotional manipulation combined with financial gain creates a strong case, especially when isolation and false concern are involved. But he also warned me this would not be quick and it would not be gentle. "Are you ready for that?" Eloin he asked. "My dear friend, let me ask you the same thing. Are you ready to be seen as difficult when you finally stand up for yourself?" I was, because I had already lost everything that mattered, except my voice. And I was done whispering. My dear friend, there is a moment in every quiet war when the other side realizes you are no longer afraid. That moment is always followed by panic. The first legal notice went out on a Tuesday morning. Tobias called it a formal challenge. I called it the beginning of the truth. By Wednesday, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Caleb left 3 voicemails. His voice wasn't calm anymore. It was sharp, irritated, like a man losing control of a story he thought he owned. "Mom, you're being manipulated. This is going to tear the family apart. You don't understand what you're doing. Notice something, my dear friend. Not once did he say, 'I'm sorry.'" Marable sent a long message, pages of words, memories, guilt wrapped in nostalgia. She reminded me of holidays, of sacrifices she claimed they made for me. That is another lesson I want you to remember. When people are cornered, they rewrite history. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on preparation. Tobias explained what would happen next. Financial records would be subpoenaed. The advisor would be questioned. The trust would be reviewed line by line. And here is where their confidence cracked. The advisor refused to cooperate. That refusal spoke louder than any confession. It turned out he had worked with Caleb before, multiple times, different accounts, different names, same patterns, fast paperwork, family pressure, older relatives. This wasn't a mistake. It was a system. Lenora documented every aggressive call, every attempt to bypass my attorney, every visit that ended with raised voices. One afternoon, Caleb showed up unannounced at the facility. Security stopped him at the front desk. He demanded to see me. I watched from down the hall as he argued, his face red, his hands shaking. That was the son who once held my hand crossing the street. When he finally did see me, with staff present, his mask was gone. "Why are you doing this to us?" he asked. "To us?" My dear friend, listen carefully. When accountability feels like an attack, it is because guilt is hiding underneath. I answered him calmly. "I am not doing this to you. I am doing this for me." He laughed bitterly. "At your age, what difference does it make?" That question nearly broke me, not because it hurt, but because it revealed how small he had made my remaining years in his mind. I leaned forward and asked him something he wasn't ready for. "If your daughter were treated the way you treated me, what would you call it?" He stood up without answering. That same week, Tobias uncovered something else. The house had been used as collateral, not sold, not protected. Risked. My home, the maple tree, the wind chimes. All leverage. The case shifted. What started as elder neglect turned into financial exploitation. That is when the letters from their lawyers stopped sounding confident. They wanted mediation. They wanted settlement. They wanted silence. But I had spent too long being quiet. My dear friend, if you are ever in this position, remember this. People who rush you into agreements fear daylight. The court date was set. And that brings us back to where I began. That courtroom, that question. "Mrs. Harper, did you sign these documents willingly?" The room held its breath. My dear friend, have you ever felt your entire life balance on one single word, yes, or no truth or silence that was me in that courtroom. The judge looked at me patiently, not rushed, not bored, just waiting. "Mrs. Harper, did you sign these documents willingly?" I took a breath, not the shallow kind I used to take when I was afraid. This one came from deep inside, from years of being quiet, from nights of regret, from the strength I didn't know I still had. "No," I said. One word, that was all it took. The courtroom shifted, chairs creaked. Someone behind me whispered. Caleb's head snapped toward me. Maribel stared at the table like it might swallow her whole. I continued, because this time no one was going to speak for me. I signed because I trusted my children. I was rushed. I was not told the consequences, and I was made to believe I was protecting my family. The judge nodded slowly. "That matters," he said. "My dear friend," those two words felt like oxygen. The advisor was called next. Under oath, he stumbled. He couldn't clearly explain why the documents were prepared so quickly, why no independent counsel was offered, why my medical status was never evaluated before control was transferred. Tobias asked him one question that sealed it. Who benefited if Mrs. Harper lost control of her assets? The advisor hesitated. That hesitation spoke volumes. Caleb's lawyer tried to paint me as emotional, confused, overwhelmed by grief after my husband's death. Tobias stood and said something I will never forget. Grief does not cancel a person's rights. I watched my children carefully during the proceedings, not with anger, with curiosity. I wanted to understand when love turned into entitlement. Maribel cried during her testimony, real tears, but even then she spoke more about inconvenience than regret. "We thought it was best," she said. "Best for who?" The judge asked pointed questions about isolation, about the retirement facility, about limited access to funds. Caleb avoided my eyes the entire time. When it was over, the judge recessed. We were told to wait. That waiting was torture. I sat on a wooden bench, hands folded, feeling every year of my age, but also something new. Respect from myself. Lenora squeezed my shoulder. Tobias gave me a small nod. "Whatever happens," he said, "you spoke the truth." My dear friend, sometimes winning is not about the outcome. It is about reclaiming your voice. But life had one more test waiting for me. Because during that break, I overheard a phone call that changed how I saw my children forever. Caleb's voice was low, angry. "If this doesn't work, we're going to lose everything." Everything. Not me. Not our relationship. Everything. And that is when I realized something heartbreaking and freeing at the same time. They were never afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing control. My dear friend, the longest minutes of your life often happen in silence. No music. No warnings. Just waiting to see who you really are when everything is out of your hands. We were called back into the courtroom just after lunch. The judge's face was calm, unreadable. That scared me more than anger would have. He began by summarizing the facts, the rushed transfers, the lack of independent counsel, the financial benefit to my children, the isolation disguised as care. With each point, my chest tightened. Then he looked directly at me. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "the court finds that your consent was compromised." I closed my eyes. The trust was suspended immediately. Control of my finances was returned to me pending further review. The deed transfer was flagged for reversal. The advisor was referred for investigation. My dear friend, I didn't cry. I sat very still. Relief is not always loud. Caleb's lawyer whispered urgently to him. Marable stared straight ahead, frozen. But the judge was not finished. He addressed my children directly. Caregiving does not mean ownership. Family does not mean entitlement. And age does not mean surrender. Those words echoed in my bones. Then came the part that hurt more than any loss of money. The judge ordered a full accounting, every dollar, every decision, and if exploitation was proven, there would be consequences. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. They asked questions I didn't answer. Tobias shielded me gently. Lenora walked beside me like a quiet guard. Caleb tried to approach me in the hallway. "Mom," he said softly, "we can fix this." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw a stranger who shared my face. I asked him one last question. "If I had never spoken up, would you have stopped?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. The days that followed were strange. My name went back on accounts. Letters arrived. Apologies came late and tangled with excuses. Marable sent a message saying she hoped we could heal. Healing requires honesty. And honesty had finally arrived, but it was too late to pretend nothing changed. I moved out of the facility by choice, not permission. A small apartment at first. Quiet, sunlight, control. I began walking every morning. I slept better. I felt lighter. But justice is not always complete when the gavel falls. Because the true cost of what they did was not measured in dollars. It was measured in distance. And that distance became permanent the day I received one final document in the mail. A civil claim, filed by my own son. Against me. My dear friend, if you think the story ends when truth comes out, you are wrong. Because in the next chapter, I will tell you how far they were willing to go. And how I finally chose peace over blood. Chapter 9. My dear friend, there is a special kind of pain that comes when you realize someone is willing to burn everything just to avoid losing power. The envelope arrived on a quiet morning. No warning, no phone call, just my name typed neatly on the front like a stranger's. Inside was the civil claim. Caleb was suing me. He claimed emotional distress, financial loss, damage to his reputation. He said my actions destroyed the family. Let me ask you something, my dear friend. When someone harms you and then sues you for speaking up, who is really on trial? Tobias read the papers slowly. His jaw tightened. This is intimidation, he said, and it tells me something important. He knows he's losing. The claim was weak, no evidence, just anger dressed in legal language, but it dragged things out, forced more hearings, more stress, more chances for my name to be twisted. Marable stayed silent. That silence hurt more than her words ever did. During one hearing, Caleb looked at me and said, "If you had just trusted us, none of this would have happened." I answered him calmly. Trust is not obedience. The judge dismissed most of the claim within minutes. The rest collapsed when financial records were presented. And then came the moment I never expected. Caleb's attorney requested a private recess. An offer was made. Drop everything. No more court, no more investigations. In exchange, I would sign a final settlement. No public findings, no admissions of wrongdoing. Silence. My dear friend, if this were you, what would you choose, peace or truth, comfort or accountability? I asked Tobias one question. If I walk away now, who does this protect? He answered honestly. Not you. I declined. That decision cost me my children completely. Calls stopped. Messages stopped. Holidays passed without cards. But something else happened too. Other women started reaching out. Letters, emails, stories just like mine, mothers, grandmothers, widows. They thanked me for speaking. They told me they were no longer afraid. That is when I understood something powerful. Family is not just who you give birth to. It is who sees your humanity. My dear friend, this is the chapter people don't warn you about. The part where truth wins, but love still loses. After the court protected my assets, I thought the storm was over. I truly did. I believed exposure would bring shame, and shame would bring reflection. I underestimated pride. The lawsuit Caleb filed against me wasn't about money. It was about control, about punishing me for refusing to stay small, for embarrassing him, for reminding the world that I was not helpless. When Tobias showed me the filing, my hands didn't shake this time. My heart didn't race. I felt something colder. Acceptance. Caleb claimed I ruined his business reputation, that I manipulated the court, that I destroyed our family by listening to outsiders instead of my own children. Let me ask you something, my dear friend. When truth exposes someone, why do they blame the light instead of their actions? The hearings were shorter this time. Judges don't like revenge dressed up as justice. Records don't lie. Timelines don't bend for emotions. Caleb avoided my eyes again, but this time I saw fear, not fear of losing money. Fear of losing the story. Because without that story, he was just a man who took advantage of his aging mother. The claim began to crumble quickly, one accusation dismissed, then another, until there was nothing left but bitterness. Then came the offer. A settlement, quiet, final. They wanted me to sign away my right to speak, to end investigations, to keep everything sealed. In exchange, they promised peace. My dear friend, listen carefully to this part. Peace that requires your silence is not peace, it is surrender. I asked to speak privately with Tobias. If I say no, I asked him, what happens next? He answered gently. You walk away clean, they don't. I said no. That decision ended my relationship with my children forever. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no last conversations, just absence. Holidays came and went. The house felt quieter than it ever had, but it did not feel empty. Because something unexpected filled that space. Freedom. I started volunteering at a local women's center. I spoke quietly at first, then more confidently, sharing what signs to watch for, what questions to ask, what mistakes I made. Women listened. Some cried. Some said, that almost happened to me. And in that moment, my dear friend, I understood something that took me 70 years to learn. I did not lose my family because I spoke up. I lost them because they believed I didn't deserve to. My dear friend, if you are still here with me, I want you to know something first. You didn't just listen to a story. You sat with a life. And I hope, with all my heart, that something in my journey stays with you long after this video ends. Today, I am 71 years old. I wake up in a small yellow house at the edge of town. It is not the same house with the maple tree and the wind chimes. That house belongs to my past. This one belongs to my peace. Every morning, I make my own coffee. Strong, just the way I like it. I sit by the window and watch the sun rise without anyone rushing me, correcting me, or managing me. For the first time in years, every decision I make is mine. People often ask me if I regret it, losing my children, losing the life I thought I would have at this age. Let me ask you, my dear friend, is it really a loss when what you lose was built on your silence? The court eventually finalized everything. The house was restored to my name, then sold on my terms. The advisor lost his license. The trust was dissolved. The money that was once used to control me now supports my future. But that is not how I measure my victory. My victory is quieter than that. It is walking without fear. It is sleeping without knots in my stomach. It is knowing that I chose truth, even when it cost me comfort. I did not get revenge. I did not celebrate their downfall. I simply stepped out of the role they assigned me and became myself again. And something beautiful happened when I did. Other women found me. Widows, mothers, grandmothers. Women who were told they were too old, too emotional, too forgetful to be trusted with their own lives. They sit across from me now, asking the same questions I once asked. Should I speak up? Am I wrong for doubting them? What if I lose everyone? And I tell them this. If love requires you to disappear, it is not love. If peace requires your silence, it is not peace. And if standing up for yourself costs you people, those people were already gone. My dear friend, if this were you, what would you choose today, comfort or dignity, approval or freedom, silence or truth? I made my choice late in life, but not too late. And if you are watching this right now, especially if you are a woman who gives too much, forgives too easily, and doubts herself too often, let my story be your warning and your permission. Read before you sign. Ask questions even when your voice shakes. And never confuse kindness with weakness. I survived not because I fought harder than them. I survived because I finally believed I mattered. If this story touched you, if it made you think, if it reminded you or someone you love to protect themselves, please like this video. Subscribe to this channel for more emotional and powerful stories that speak truth to real life. Turn on your notifications so you never miss the next chapter of someone else finding their strength. And please, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know who sat with me until the end. Thank you, my dear friend. Your life is still yours. Never forget that.